Hey Horse World, I'm Noëlle Floyd and welcome to a special bonus episode series we're calling No Stupid Questions. I'm so excited to bring this to you because honestly, it's a personal one for me. Growing up, I was often made to feel bad for asking too many questions, especially in the riding world. It left me feeling small and unsure, like my curiosity wasn't welcome. But here's the truth. No question is ever too small, too silly, or too unimportant, especially in a sport as rich and complex as ours. That's why I'm passionate about creating this space where curiosity is celebrated and we can all keep learning together. Each month, as part of this bonus series, I'll be sitting down with some of the most interesting and influential people in the horse world to dive into those burning questions you've always wanted to ask, but maybe didn't feel comfortable doing. Whether it's about horse care, training, or the more philosophical side of being an equestrian, this is your chance to ask and learn. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Jessica Van Buskirk, an equine osteopath who is basically what every horse owner dreams of. Jessica helps improve performance, prevent injuries, and foster a deeper connection between horse and rider by addressing the root causes of discomfort, not just the symptoms. We're going to talk about why equine osteopathy matters, how it can transform your horse's health, and why it might be the missing piece in your horse's care routine. So if you've ever wondered how to help your horse feel and perform their best, this episode is for you. Let's get curious together, because in the horse world, there truly are no stupid questions. Well, Jessica, welcome to the Dear Horse World podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
So guys, today is special. This is our inaugural No Stupid Questions podcast episode. This is inspired a little bit by my own experience, but also just like a general curiosity we want to have in the horse world about being able to ask questions and being able to ask any question. And there not ever being a limit to the amount of questions that you can ask, and that there's no such thing as a stupid question. We're going to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions, send in their questions, or put them in our No Stupid Questions jar. And I'm really excited about this because I think people have a lot of questions about osteopathy and about their horses' bodies. And you're going to be able to answer both of those things.
Perfect. I love it.
Before we start though, Jessica, do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, I'm an equine osteopath, EDO. So basically, what an equine osteopath is we're a practitioner that works on the body, and our main goal is to reestablish complete balance and homeostasis in the body. And that doesn't just include the skeleton. It is a whole horse approach. So we're looking at everything, including the vascular system, the visceral system, the neurological system, the entire horse. And what we want to do is allow that horse's natural healing abilities to take over once we do what we do. I went to the Vlugan Institute of Equine Osteopathy and Education in Texas. The school's now in Florida, and then the main school's in Germany. So I've been doing this for almost 5 years now, and yeah, I'm very, very thankful for the job I have.
I'm going to kick this off with some of my own stupid questions.
Perfect.
No stupid questions. They're not stupid, guys.
They're
questions. There's no such thing. What is osteopathy?
Okay, so osteopathy, like I said, it's a manual therapy. I am a canine and equine osteopath, so horse and dog. But honestly, like there's human osteopaths. You can work on felines. I've worked on a bull before, a bucking bull. There's really any species. And in every species, like I said, we're working to regain balance and mobility throughout the entire body. And so as an equine osteopath, I have to work with a team. And so that's where Dr. Connie Fancy comes into play, which I'm very, very thankful to work with her. So with the horse, we have several aspects. Their hooves, that's the basis of their foundation. I need those to be correct. Their teeth, that plays a huge role in what I do. and then again their visceral system. And so I like to think of myself as I'm putting together a puzzle. When I get a horse, especially a new one that I've never seen before, that's kind of how I approach it. It's like, how am I going to put this puzzle back together? And for it to be complete, I have to get every piece to fit. And so that's kind of what I do. And my goal is, like, I'm an advocate for the horse. That's my main thing. And so I also want to educate my clients on how they can do things to help maintain their horse through, whether it's a performance horse, a pleasure horse, a pasture pet, anything. How can they help their horse after I have created and restored complete mobility and balance?
You talk about homeostasis.
Yeah.
What is homeostasis?
Okay, so homeostasis is when the body is, like, I'm going to say the word balance a lot. You're probably going to get sick of me saying that. But basically in complete balance. So their hormonal system, their circulation, how is the body able to maintain itself in a way that it's in optimal health? That's a homeostatic balance. So we always, one of the first diagrams we draw in osteopathy school is the homeostatic balance, and it's basically like, it's like a cross. You have two lines and then a circle around it, and how do we stay in the middle of that circle? And we have, like, the body is a catabolic and anabolic system. That's your metabolism. And then there's acidity and alkalinity, and how we need to keep those four things in unison and balance. And so that comes with, again, I don't just work on the musculoskeletal system. I'm constantly thinking about, what is the circulatory system doing and how can I improve that? How can I prevent impedances in the nervous system? That is how I help the body achieve homeostasis, is by addressing all of those parameters.
You talk about systems.
Mm-hmm.
How many systems exist in a horse?
Oh my gosh. Okay, we're going to count. There's their nervous system, their circulatory system, respiratory system, digestive system, lymphatic system, hormonal system, which a lot of those are all intertwined, reproductive system.
And reproductive system,
yeah,
nice.
That's a big one.
Okay, so there's at least seven systems that exist in a horse.
Yeah, at least.
And osteopathy is working to restore balance in all seven.
Yeah, exactly.
And they all interact with each other?
Absolutely. As an osteopath, we talk about the three pillars that we work with, and that's their parietal system, which is their musculoskeletal system, their visceral system, which consists of basically seven systems of, like, the visceral system, and then our cranial sacral system.
Wow. To
achieve balance, you have to address all three of those.
Wait, and can you repeat them again?
Parietal system, which is your musculoskeletal system.
Okay.
Your visceral system, which is your organs, and your craniosacral system. So you need to address all three of those.
And what's your craniosacral system? What is that?
Craniosacral system is how the cerebral spinal fluid moves through the spinal canal. Oh. So it moves in a rhythmic motion from the cranium, which is the skull, all the way down to the sacrum. And that's actually a measurable movement. And that's what we call our primary respiratory mechanism. So basically, every time that cerebral spinal fluid moves from the sacrum to the cranium, it's almost like a pulse. Oh. And it's measurable in humans, horses, dogs, everything. You can measure it. It's different. And that is an indicator, or it's a way to measure, we call it the vitality of the animal. Basically, how healthy is that animal? Is it in a stressful environment, or is it in a stressful condition, or is it it's like a way to kind of detect, like, is their sympathetic system so, like, overriding their entire body? And there's depending on how strong the primary respiratory mechanism, its speed, it's when you're feeling for it, you're feeling for a lot of different things, and that tells you a lot about what's going on with the horse. So that's your craniosacral system, and you work on that system by working on the cranial bones, the sacrum, and again, it's trying to get that fluidity as balanced and as consistent as possible.
As an osteopath, you went to school for
it took about 4 years to
get your certification.
Yeah. So the school I went to, it's a module system. It takes a lot of dedication because it's a lot. You basically go for a week. They give you as much information as possible. I always say it's like drinking water out of a fire hose. That's like what that week is like. And then you go home, you practice on your horses.
You integrate it.
Yeah, exactly. And then you move, there's 14 modules, and then there's a practical and a written exam at the end for you to achieve your license.
As we go through this episode, there's going to be a lot of amazing and very rich information about osteopathy. And I think what's a really good disclaimer is when people are looking for osteopaths in their community, what are some things they should be looking for?
That's a really good question. So some things to look for, honestly, ask about their certifications. Unfortunately, osteopathy, like even in human, it's very unregulated. And I find there's a lot of modalities like that in the equine world, maybe not so much in the human. I think we're gaining ground, but that's one thing. Ask about their credentials, where they went to school. They should have some sort of, like, it's the same like when you're a veterinarian, you have your DVM. That's kind of behind your name.
Yeah.
So for me, I have EDO, which is Equine Diplomat of Osteopathy. So when I pass my exam and then I register under a governing body, I have those letters basically, and I'm very thankful for them because it does kind of set you aside in the profession. And I think that's what a lot of veterinarians are looking for to work with us. Okay. So that's something that they should look for. Ask them where they went to school. Ask what they work on, like ask what osteopathy is. And if they can tell you that they work on all three of those, like that's a huge thing. If they work on all three of those systems, the parietal, the visceral, and the craniosacral, you should be good to go.
Okay.
But if they're only working on the parietal system
or the craniosacral, because there are craniosacral therapists out there,
are amazing. And I think every modality has its place. I'm probably going to sound biased, but like, I don't know, if you can find a good osteopath, you're well on your way with your horse.
Okay, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Let's dive into the questions. Okay, shake them up.
So shake it.
I'll pull out the first one. This one looks like a big one.
Oh boy.
Okay. What is a simple change that every horse owner in every situation could make today?
Now, I'm not a nutritionist, but I would say how we're feeding our horses. Huge. As an equine osteopath, I always say I'm limited in my work by what the horse's environment is. So I can only do so much because I'm not a farrier, I'm not a dentist, I'm not a vet, I'm not a nutritionist, and I don't feed the horse. But ultimately, if you can keep your horse on a very clean diet, I like keeping it simple. Think about what do they eat in nature. I think that how we feed our horses really impacts the rest of their body. Your fascia is the biggest depot for toxins, the largest depot for toxins.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Liver, kidneys, huge. I actually just I just helped put on a conference in Olds, Alberta this summer, and we had a human dentist he's actually from Hanna, Alberta, and he has done a ton of studies on fluoride and mercury in humans and like how that affects their entire system. But he's also related it over to the equine world, and they have done studies to show they'll put mercury, I believe, hopefully I'm getting this all right, but they've put mercury fillings in like sheep or something like that to see where the toxins are going.
Oh.
Fascia is the biggest depot.
Wow.
So your fascia makes up everything in your body. It helps the integrity of the joints, your muscles, ligaments, the peritoneum of the organs. So if you think about that, and if we're not conscious about what we're putting in our horses' diet, what's going into their bodies, I can work on horses as much as I want. But if that doesn't change, I'm kind of hitting a brick wall. So I think feeding your horse a clean diet, knowing what's in your feed. Again, I'm not a nutritionist, but I do know that there's a lot of hype on like high protein, watching sugar. That's huge. Horses are not meant to be digesting a ton of sugar. That's something I would say.
Okay. I think that's really empowering for our listeners. And you talk about hoof, like I also really wanted to bring it back to that piece you mentioned earlier, because I think that's really cool, and it really highlighted it for me when you were working on my horses was you can only do so much. You're really looking to the owners to ensure that the feet are up to date and well and like done with thoroughness and expertise.
Yeah.
The teeth are done regularly and done with thoroughness and expertise. And nutrition is there. The horse is getting everything that they need so that their body is functioning to the best of their ability with all of those things in mind. So then you actually have like a solid foundation to then work with.
Exactly.
Okay.
Awesome.
Next one. What in your work with horses do you see that often gets overlooked?
Osteopathy isn't only about, it is about rebalancing, but it's also about allowing the horse to draw from its own reserves and allow for its body to be able to maintain itself. Having horse owners for them to be able to have a proper maintenance program after, and that doesn't mean me working on it, how they can help their horse build postural muscle, build a foundation for them through their riding, I guess. Because of what we do with horses, like in the wild, they don't have anyone on their backs.
Right.
So I always tell people, like, one really big thing that I guess what they should be doing is working on, like, it's almost like cross training for horses, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't matter what discipline they're in. So I would say one of my limitations is when I work on a horse, but then they go home and their bodies aren't given the time they need to heal, and then their bodies are not prepped properly for what they're meant to do. I try really hard to educate my clients on that. Again, like, I'm not a rehab specialist, but I do know how the muscles work, and I know how the body, I love biomechanics. That's kind of my jam. When I'm working on a horse, I'm like, oh, well, if the sacrum's doing this is why they can't do that kind of thing. Cool. And so if I can help the client with that, like, I love doing that. The body needs a minimum of 24 to 48 hours to rest after just, like, not even a visceral mobilization, like just a regular, like, if they don't need a lot of visceral work, but they just need mobilize it through their joints. And then, so it's I guess a lower scaled appointment. Yeah. They still need that time because it takes at least 24 to 48 hours for blood parameters to change after an appointment, and then your fascia has to change, and then that horse has to figure out how it's supposed to move again properly.
Yeah, like in the new way that its body is put together.
So if you just go ahead and ride right away, you're honestly not giving the body a chance.
You're taking like 4 steps back to take 1 step forward.
Exactly.
So it sounds like what you're saying is don't underestimate the impact of rest.
Yeah, rest and what you can do for your horse after with riding.
Well, because like, so in my mare's case, and we talked Dr. Connie Fancy and I about Lady. So she has an L6 bone spur. Yeah. Right. And you said to me, you're like, Noëlle, she's going to do physio for the rest of her life. Right. In order to support what you're doing with her from a physiological level or biomechanical level. And I've seen the impact that physio, like, and it can be so simple. These are like raised, walk poles are huge. You said like backing up. Like done in a correct postural way. It blew my mind when you showed me the now what do you call that?
That's a good question. I don't have a very good name for it. I call them butt tucks, I guess, because they're not really belly lifts. I don't know. I guess you could call them butt tucks or glute contractions, maybe?
Glute engagement?
Yeah, sure. That's a great one.
Oh my God. I was like, first of all, guys, I'm just going to say, like, this was probably one of the most, like, visually appeal, like from a rider's point of view, from a horse owner's point of view. Actually, that's a good question. Do a lot of horses need that glute engagement?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So the reason why is, again, like I was saying, horses in the wild, they're a fight or flight animal. They need to move forward to get away from predators. Yeah. We sit on their backs. They're honestly not designed for that, but we have to do what we can to help support that.
Right.
So building the glute muscles are one of the most important postural muscles in a horse. And because we do so much forward movement, their hamstrings become way overdeveloped. And a lot of people,
like ladies, my mare's hamstrings,
exactly.
She has like super hamstrings.
Yep, she does. Like that would be, yeah. Absolutely. She's got that down pat. And that's okay, but it's like you got to balance all those muscles out.
Right.
And if she was just a horse out in the wild, it's fine, but because she has someone on her back, those
and she's going and moving cattle, or she's gonna, we're gonna teach her how to jump, or all the things that she's doing, we have to support her body. We have to create an environment where her body can support these activities.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So it sounds like rest is a huge one, and then what you can do is like cross training.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because until I got Lady, I didn't really think, and I've been in high performance spaces within the horse world, ridden professionally even, and we had cross training, but I never knew cross training until I had to like rebuild a horse. And I had to rebuild a horse that had previous injuries. I was like, oh, wow, this is like a whole world in which you learn a lot about the way the horse's body actually moves, and it's actually really empowering because everything you can do from the ground, and they're really minimally invasive, like they're completely non-invasive activities. But I watched them change my mare's body like over a winter time, and it was really amazing. It's really empowering, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. You grab one.
Okay. What is the most common problem you see in performance horses? Overdeveloped hamstrings and atrophied glute muscles. 100%. In the cutting horse world and the rein cow horse world, they do more, a lot of diagonal work. They do a lot more backing up, so it's better. But like, I'm a barrel racer. I will those are some of those horses have the biggest hamstrings I've ever seen. Jumpers, and that's okay because their job is forward motion, but again, you have someone on their back and you have to stay. I always say it's like stabilizing the bridge.
So there was a lot of fuss on social media, like over the last year or two, where we're seeing photos of atrophied backs at the international level. So horses in a jog at the Olympic Games or at the World Equestrian Games, and we're seeing atrophied backs. Why?
There's a lot leading up to the Olympics. How far they had to travel. There's on an airplane. Hauling a horse in a horse trailer is hard enough on them. I always remember, like, I used to, when I was younger, I had this one horse that when I'd take her to the vet would see her once a year, and he always commented about how when he saw her, she looked really thoroughbred-y, and she might have ulcers because her back is like looking atrophied. And I'm like, she just was in a 7-hour trailer ride. She does not look like this at home. I promise you, when she's at home, I have a hard time keeping weight off of her. She looks at grass and she gets fat. And so that's a good example I think about, is just that 7-hour trailer ride to the vet completely changed how she looked.
What's the system that's sort of responsible for stress?
Hypothalamic pituitary axis, and that's where cortisol is really integrated into the system. And so when you have high cortisol, that's your stress hormone. Would that play a part? Oh yeah, I could go down a rabbit hole with that. We'd be here for a very long time.
Okay, well, let's like semi dive into that rabbit hole, because I'm fascinated by the nervous system purely from a human point of view. And then the more I learn about the nervous system for horses, the more I feel like I understand the way we interact as two species.
You have your autonomic nervous system, so that's your parasympathetic and your sympathetic system. And a lot of people understand that, like, your sympathetic is your fight or flight system. So that's what kicks in when, and horses are predisposed to that because they're a prey animal. So as soon as there's danger, and it doesn't matter what it is, like a horse, yes, we domesticated them, but like if they think something is going to harm them, it's automatic that they're like, I have to get away from this. Your parasympathetic system is, we call it your rest and digest system. So it's what allows for the horses, it's almost like their catabolic system. It's like their building system, basically. So that's another thing that we want to keep in balance all the time. Now, pain, what happens when a horse is in pain or stress is their sympathetic, we call it their base activity. So like kind of what's their normal level. And then if their sympathetic base activity escalates or increases, that's what can happen when they're in pain. Now, when that happens, it impedes a lot of their parasympathetic processes, like how they're able to digest their food, reproduction, and other things. So that's why, like, I'm sure Connie, maybe she touched on this, but she'll be the first one to say that a mare in pain is not going to be able to reproduce because their body is not in a state for that. So, I mean, obviously I think we've come a long ways in management, like, or we've tried, there's a lot of education out there on how to manage your horse in a stress-free environment. But yeah, again, like if they're immobile, like what I find that usually what's happening is their sympathetic base activity is so high that it causes fixations in the spine, fixations in a joint. So another thing, is if they have pain or mobility problems in an organ, same thing, that causes the sympathetic base activity to increase, and then the structures that are related to that organ become fixated. So that's kind of my job as an osteopath, is to find that route of where that's happening.
And so does that mean that like for example, my 2 horses are traveling with me across the country for the next year, because we're recording and we're promoting and recording this podcast. We're also, we're filming, and they're on this journey with us. So they're going to have a baseline of higher stress because they're going to spend more time in the trailer.
Yeah.
What are some things that I can do to manage that?
Horses are meant to be eating all the time. So that's an important thing.
Is that true?
Well, they are for the most part, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of people think that they're meant to eat grass all the time, but that's not actually true. Like a horse in the wild will eat trees. So
foliage, leaves.
Different. Their body knows what they need. Unfortunately, like you can't have a forest in your horse trailer for Milano and Lady to...
Why not?
Yeah. But having feed in front of them as often as possible is important.
Okay.
Making sure they're hydrated, so stopping for water, that's a really important one. And then giving their bodies a rest. Like the trailer ride is exhausting for horses, because basically their postural system is like a workout, honestly, because they're trying to stabilize themselves. That's why, like, we always say, like, for rodeo horses that are going for hours and hours on the trailer, like that is almost more exhausting than
what they're about to do.
Yeah. 100%. Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's really important. Making sure that they can rest. So yeah, breaks off the trailer. And then obviously they're herd animals. So if they can be with another horse, that's always helpful. So you've got a pair, so that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say those. And then I mean, ultimately, if you have a chance to get their body worked on, making sure that everything, like if they're not in pain before they have to do those things, which you're set, then that's the ultimate.
Is it true that horses put 60% of their weight on their front end? And if so, how does that affect the work that we do with them?
That is a very controversial topic. That's what I learned growing up. And
that's what I've heard too.
Yeah. And if you look at a horse, it kind of looks like that. But actually, if you think about how a horse is built, so we as humans, like, well, we're bipeds, so we stand up and down, and our concussive forces, like that's our discs in our back, are to absorb the concussive force. A horse they're quadrupeds, and they don't have collarbones, so they don't have anything but fascia, ligaments, tendons, and muscles attaching their front limbs onto their body.
Whoa.
That's the only thing that's holding them there.
That's wild.
Yeah. Even like how, like, you have your first few ribs attaching to the sternum, but still, like, there's no collarbone there. So if you think about it logically, if a horse was putting 60% of their weight on their front end, I don't know how they would be able to stabilize themselves.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yes, like they had, like, I think everyone thinks that because they have the head and neck that's added to, like, cranial or forward of the front limbs. But the way their postural system works, like, I would say more of their weight should be put on the hind end. I learned that was like the second day of osteopathy school, and I was mind blown. I was like, there's no way. But if you think about it, and I mean, I would say that what happens in a lot of horses is when they have mobility problems in the hind end, then yes, they distribute more of their weight to the front end because they have to compensate for that. But those front limbs, that thoracic inlet is not built for that. So then what happens to the rest of the body? That's where you get into all your compensatory mechanisms and how, again, it's a whole body approach. There might be something wrong in the front end, and it might look like this horse has horribly atrophied neck muscles, but why? Where is that coming from?
Well, and I realized that when we dove deeper and Lady was able to be put on the pelvic floor with Connie, that we had this L6 and sacrum limitations or immobility. We had a flipped ovary, all these things, which would then push her to compensate by building all her strength. And when I first got her and I worked with Josh Nickel, he was like, all her stories and all her tension is a lot of that is built into her shoulder. This is where she protects herself. And then from a TCM's point of view, or traditional Chinese medicine, I remember having a conversation with someone and they were like, oh, and this is like totally off topic, guys, but this was crazy. That person was like, oh, she's protecting her heart. She's been through a lot of trauma. So all the tension, she gets like locked in like this, right? And so this is when it starts to really reinforce to me how this is a whole horse. Like you cannot look at anything in isolation. Because now I understand that if she has been putting a lot of, and she is like a bit forward, like she's built a bit downhill. Yeah. Now that is like, now it makes you, it begs the question, okay, well, how long has that issue been going on in the sacrum and in L6? How much has she been immobile and limited in her lower back? And then has that caused so much compensation in the front end?
Yeah. Absolutely. I was going to say that as well. Yeah. Like she definitely holds a lot of tension in her shoulder blades. 100%. I found that as well yesterday, but where is that originating from? Where is the root problem? I guess I should have put that I said that when I was explaining what osteopathy is, and that's what it is. It's finding the root problem. Yeah. I do look at symptoms, but I want to know why that symptom is happening. And I'm not going to just eliminate the symptom. I'm going to figure out where the root is. And so with her, was it that she had some sort of traumatic fall? She had visceral immobilities, including her kidney and ovary. And then now she has a torn lumbosacral disc space. And then she just transferred all of her weight to her front end to try and compensate for that.
And that's what horses
wonder.
Yeah. And that's what horses do, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what we do.
Yeah. A horse is always trying to keep themselves in balance. They're trying to maintain themselves as well. And so that's where these compensatory mechanisms come into play. You can have opposite. You can have decompensations, and that's when you have that's what causes pain in a horse. Compensatory immobilities aren't really that painful. It's just how their body adapts.
Have you ever felt stuck with your horse? Maybe they're spooking 1 minute and unresponsive the next. And instead of your training sessions bringing you closer, they're only adding to the frustration and you both feel depleted or worn out. What if the issue isn't your horse or your technique? What if it's about a deeper need your horse has that's being overlooked? When I first got my mare Lady, she swung back and forth between complete distrust and disassociation of people to highly anxious and sometimes highly aggressive. From day one, Lady was very communicative, clearly wanting me to understand some things about her and her reality, but I didn't know how to interpret what she was trying to tell me until I met Josh Nickel. I had heard about his relational approach to horsemanship, so when I got a lucky last-minute spot in one of his clinics, I jumped at the opportunity. Within the first 10 minutes, on the first day of the clinic, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I knew Josh's work was the missing piece I had felt in my own riding for so many years. In Josh Nickel's course, Understanding Your Horse's Needs on NF+, you'll discover 3 fundamental needs that each horse has: mind, space, and pressure. These aren't just labels. They represent the emotional core of your horse's behavior. If your horse feels disconnected, anxious, or even aggressive or unpredictable, it could be that a primary need isn't being met. In his masterclass, Josh teaches you how to recognize which primary need your horse is asking to be met moment to moment. Then how to meet that need and build a deeper connection based on trust and understanding. I can speak from experience. When your horse feels seen and understood by you because you are addressing their core needs, they transform in front of your eyes. My mare Lady sure has. If you're ready to better understand your horse and get the answers you need, just like I did, and continue to do, head to noellefloydplus.com or download the Noëlle Floyd app on Apple TV, Roku, iOS, and Android and start learning today. What are the most common problems you see in older horses?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say on like a musculoskeletal level, I see fascia that is so tight and like it almost feels like you can't fix it. And it's because we call basically how fascia works is you have these fibers and you have we call it an amorph matrix. So it's like you have these fibers and then you have fluid in between the fibers, and that's what gives it its integrity and its strength. And then when you have a circulation problem, it ends up that fluid within the fibers decreases, and then we call it's cross-linking of fibers, and so that's what causes really tight like rope-like fascia. But it's not the fascia that's the problem. It's that they've had poor circulation for so long to that area of the body. Say you've got a horse that has had really immobile withers, so upper thoracic spine, sternum, first rib issues for so long. And what happens in these horses is you see, we kind of almost call it a U-neck. So it's like right in front of the withers, you see a dip in their neck, and their scalenus muscles, so that's right in front of the scapula coming down the neck, they're pulled in. So that is just from poor, like your thoracic inlet is where like your heart is contained in there, and that's where your brachial plexus originates and goes down to the front limbs, but then also the blood goes up to the head and neck. So if that is all restricted and there's no improper circulation going to those muscles and fascia, eventually that's when you get changes in how fascia looks and works. And if it's left like that for long enough, it's so hard to retrain that.
Wow.
So for me, it's like in older horses that have been maintained well, you can tell. Like I do have clients that have 25-year-old horses that look like they're 15. And
yeah.
you can,
and we see that in show jumping as well. We see that in eventing. We see horses that actually compete and they look amazing.
Yeah, you can tell that their bodies have been taken care of properly. And then there's those that you can tell like they've had immobilities for years and years and years. And so the other thing that I see commonly, especially because I do work on a lot of performance horses, is I will have clients that will come to me and say, oh, my horse, I've been to the vet, my horse does have arthritis in their hocks and stifles and so on. So I always say as an osteopath, my worst nightmare is structural change because I can't do anything about it. Okay. It's just there and we have to. So for Lady, my worst nightmare as her osteopath is she's got a lumbosacral junction that has a tear.
Yes.
I can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
We just have to try and maintain her through that.
Okay.
So what happens though is like if I can work on a horse early enough in its life and because arthritis there is a component to it that is due to poor circulation to that joint, because that's like the blood perfusion helps create joint fluid. That's how it, like the fluids in the body are all the same. It's just that depending on where they are, what type of cells are in that fluid. So like your joint fluid, your lymph fluid, everything is the same other than depending on where it is in the body, but it's got the same like matrix to it, I guess you can say.
Cool.
But so if you have poor I always say that if you've got poor biomechanics and circulation somewhere where a movement originates, somewhere else in the body has to take over for that. So a prime example is a lot of horses that have hock and stifle arthritis. There's genetic components to it 100%. There's things that an osteopath can't even touch. But a lot of the times, if you can fix where a movement originates, so like for example, horses that like cutting horses, reining horses, cow horses that have to stop, back up, do a lot of that movement, that all starts at the sacrum and the pelvis. That's where that movement originates. If that sacrum and pelvis aren't moving properly, your hocks and stifles have to take the brunt of that. So they have to flex and extend, and they do anyways, but it originates at the pelvis and the sacrum. But then if that's not working, then your hocks and stifles have to take the brunt of that movement. So number one, you have two joints that are doing something that they're not, like, they're meant to do it, but they're not meant to take the load of the work. But then also you have poor circulation from your lumbar plexus that goes down to the hind limbs, and it's not providing the right nutrition to the joints. That's a recipe for a structural change. So if I get to a horse later in life that has had that problem for a long time, I can't do anything about the structural changes in the joints, and so it's something that I just have to work around. So I would say in older horses, the number one thing that I do find is arthritic changes that I don't diagnose. Like, that's the number one rule as an osteopath, is we can't diagnose anything. But like I said, I'm lucky to work with a number of vets that I have a relationship with, and they'll share information with me, and the clients always tell me any important history that the horse has. So if I know that, I can't do anything about it, but I want to be able to help prevent it from getting worse, and then help the horse be able to maintain its body with those changes. So getting back to the question, because I went really off topic, I would say in older horses, you find fascial strains that are just like so complex and so bad that it's really hard for me to work with that. And then I do find a lot of arthritic changes in horses that I have to kind of work around and help the rest of the body adapt to that.
The horse world, we hear a lot about injections. We talk a lot about joints. Yeah. We talk a lot about stifle injections and hock injections, and then there's a lot of conversation about the thoracic sling, which I actually want to ask you. I'm going to insert my question into, because I have, but like, it makes me think that we should be talking about the sacrum and the lumbar spine and the pelvis as much or more, because it seems like there's always this go-to of joint injections. There's always, we literally have a mini masterclass on NF Plus on injections.
That's awesome.
Which is great.
Yeah.
But I always remember growing up that there was a lot of talk about that. You get your vet in to look at how are the joints looking. It's always about this obsession with the legs almost. And it's so interesting that now I'm in my 30s and I'm starting to really try to educate myself about the thoracic sling, the pelvis, the sacrum, the lumbar spine, and maybe I think I can thank Lady for that, because it's been such a body journey, and Gigi as well. Yeah. Is like, these guys are teaching me a lot about actually the part of the body that would actually inform how their joints age.
Absolutely. And so again, I'm not a vet, and every modality has its place, and I could not do my job without a veterinarian. I want to work with them 100%. I think the other thing that's important is, as an osteopath, you need to ask your client, what is your goal with your horse? Right. What do you want to do with them? If you want to use them for performance and that is the client's goal, okay, then I need to work with that. There are a lot of cases where I will work on a horse and I can tell that the hocks and stifles are not moving how they should. And again, I cannot diagnose that they have arthritis, but if they tell me that because that's what their vet has said, there are some cases where I'm like, as an advocate for the horse, I probably would not be doing what their owner's wanting to be doing with them. Right. However, the owner is my client and I'm going to help them achieve what they want with their horse as much as I can. So that is where vet work is so important, and that's where that's needed. And I don't ever want to hinder a horse's ability. So if that's what they need, 100%. I mean, I have performance horses. If they do need an injection and I can't do what I need to do, or my work isn't fixing the problem, then we need to go somewhere else. But I think, and I'm so lucky to work with Dr. Connie Fancy, because her and I, this is where we're so good at bouncing ideas off each other, is that if we have a horse, if we can do something else before we inject a joint, she is game on. And I love that about her. And I think that I think in our horse world, like especially with like the aged events, people want results immediately. You're probably not going to get that when you work with me. I mean, some people do say, like, I've had clients say, oh my gosh, like my horse is completely different the next day, which that's awesome. But when you are changing things like in a horse's body that has been like that for a long time, it usually doesn't happen overnight. And so that's hard with a client too, is if they want immediate change, a joint injection's easy. It's going to fix it. It's an anti-inflammatory. But again, in my opinion, and like just from my education, it's a symptom that you're seeing, but like where is that symptom coming from?
What is the root cause?
Yeah, you're always going back to the root cause.
And that's again coming back to, and you know, Connie and I talked about this, looking at the whole situation.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
So this is what's empowering, is that work with practitioners that ask lots of questions.
Yeah.
Work with in different modalities that give you the whole picture. And then I think as horse owners, we feel really empowered because we have more information than we did before. If we were just looking at something through a specific lens, like a pharmacology, you know, lens or a biomechanical lens, we're not looking at the feet, the nutrition, the environment, the social construct of a horse's world. What's their what's their mental health like, right? All these things are going to play into the seven systems.
At least
seven systems. One. I'm sure there are, but like the fact that I just didn't even know that before this podcast, that there are at least seven systems that play into the daily lives of our horses. You know, and like, I mean, if I were to do an exam, I don't think I could write them down, but we're going to make sure that we have lots of show notes in here to help everybody, because, you know, again, guys, like I'm with you, like this is a lot of information, but it's so enriching. And at the end of the day, it's so empowering, right? I want to go try to get at the bottom.
Yeah.
The question is, what is an osteopath, or how is it different to massage or chiropractic? Okay. Which you already answered, what is an osteopath, but let's actually talk about the differences between osteopathy and chiropractic or massage.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give me some grace on this because I'm not a chiropractor or a massage therapist, but I work with them. Chiropractic is a broad, like you can dive into a lot of different things when you're a chiropractor. Like I have an uncle, he actually lives in New Mexico. He's a human chiropractor, and he has dove into muscle testing. He works on organs. Like I think you can dive into those things, but for the most part, a chiropractor is working on the parietal system, so the skeleton, which that's great. But again, so I do run into cases. I just had one yesterday. It was purely skeletal. That's all that was wrong with it. I wish I had horses like that all the time, but that's not the case. Yeah. So that's okay. But if your horse has a problem, or the root problem is coming from somewhere deeper, whether it's bloodworms, something like that. Yeah. Whether it is stomach ulcers, anything like that, it sets off the sympathetic system in the body. And so you can mobilize that spine as many times as you want, and you are still not going to be resolving it 100% or permanently. So that's the difference between an osteopath and a chiropractor, is that they more so work on the musculoskeletal system only, whereas an osteopath is working again on the visceral system, the cranial sacral system, and the parietal system. And then with a massage therapist, same thing. They're working on the muscles and the fascia, and so they can be amazing because they can help me. Like if I have a psoas muscles are a little bit hard to get to in a horse, but like a scalenus muscle that is so tight and it's entrapping, like we have ganglions, we and horses have ganglions in the neck where they're basically nerve bundles that have secondary or tertiary nerves that go somewhere else. If that muscle is so tight, and because of the origin and insertion points of it, like I work on that more, the origin and insertion points of a muscle. But if I cannot fix it, then a massage therapist can help release that. I don't really do that, so that's perfect. That's awesome. But again, they're just more working on the muscles and the fascia. So if there is a deeper problem, I mean, it's amazing for horses, but it's just not getting to the root problem. But I think, like, my take on it is, I think that everyone can work together. That's the main thing with me.
Awesome.
I'm all about a team effort. I cannot do what I do without other modalities.
So there's a lot of conversation about the thoracic sling.
Mm-hmm.
What is the thoracic sling and why is it important?
Okay. Great question. So the thoracic sling is basically the muscles and fascia that contain the thoracic cavity, or the entrance into the thoracic cavity. So it's basically the structures that are surrounding the heart, the lungs. So it's the entrance kind of almost from the neck to the thoracic cavity where the rib cage is. So it's comprised of your upper thoracic spine, so your withers, your lower cervicals, your first few ribs, your sternum, scapulas, and your pleural ligaments, and all of the fascia that's connected within that. But what's important is what it contains. So it contains the blood vessels and the nerves that are going from the heart down to the brachial plexus. So that's the circulation and the innervation to your front limbs. And then also it contains the route for the nerves and the blood vessels to go up to the head and neck. So we always say that, like, you can have a problem, like a circulation problem in the head of a horse, and you can address the TMJ, COC1, all of the cranial bones. But if that's not where it's starting, usually it's in the thoracic inlet.
What's the thoracic inlet?
The thoracic inlet is the opening from the thoracic cavity basically to the head and neck, and then back into the thoracic cavity. So it's the front part of the horse where, like, their shoulders, their withers, all of that is.
Oh,
that's
like
the
that
inlet.
Place where the neck meets the shoulder?
Yeah,
like
basically.
The shoulder and the scapula area?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you were looking, like, from a front view of the horse, you would see, like, as you're going, like, if you were able to have a camera to go in there, as you're exiting the cervical spine and going into the thoracic spine, and what is contained within that cavity.
And why is there's so much conversation about the thoracic sling?
Well, number one, so there's a lot of thoracic sling problems because of problems in the hind end of a horse. And so if you, and again, that those front limbs are not built to take that load because it's a muscular structure, or it's mainly made up of muscle, and that's how the front limbs are attaching. So if you're overloading that front end, you are putting an enormous amount of strain on that sling. And then it's just such an intricate system with the circulatory system and the nervous system. And it goes vice versa. Like, you have problems in the cervical spine, you have your scalenus muscles, you have like, one of the big nerves that we talk about is the phrenic nerve in the horse, and that originates at C3, 4, and 5, and then it travels down the neck, and it branches off. There's another nerve that innervates the capsule of the shoulder joint, but then the phrenic nerve innervates your diaphragm, and it innervates your left. You have a left and right one, and depending which one, it's which organ in the body. So you can have a cervical spine problem that affects it's sensory and motor. So it goes both ways. But again, it affects, like, the diaphragm is another huge one. I can talk about the diaphragm for hours. And that's a part, it is attached to your sternum, but then it's also attached to your lumbar and lower thoracic spine. So again, if you have problems in your hind end, your sacrum and lower lumbar or upper lumbar, that affects your diaphragm. That's going to change the mobility of your sternum, and your first ribs are attached to your sternum, and that's a part of your thoracic sling. So I could have it's like a
chain.
Exactly. What I like about osteopathy, like I said, it's like putting a puzzle back together. So once I find the primary problems, I'm like, okay, what do I fix first? Because it's like you want the flow of circulation to happen in a proper pattern, or you might start fixing something and cause we call it a congestion when there's no improper circulation or blood perfusion to the area, or it gets backed up. And so I could fix one thing, but then cause a congestion somewhere else because I didn't open up that channel first. Okay. Yeah. So it's like putting a puzzle back together every time. It's
so interesting when you talk about the thoracic sling, because it reminds me kind of this sort of like epidemic that exists in the horse world, where we are very obsessed with the thing we can see which is the front end of the horse. So when we're riding, everyone's always upset, put the horse in the frame.
Yeah.
Or everyone, that horse is behind the vertical. Or this is, this obsession about the horse, and rightfully so, horses at the top performance level in dressage, doing an entire test at the Olympics behind the vertical, and people are going like, how are we how is this something we're biomechanically endorsing? Is this really an integrity? And so it reminds me kind of this like theme that I'm starting to witness in conversation, which is riders are really focused, and I've even been experiencing this in my own journey, in my own riding, is we can't see the back end. We can't see our horses, but we can feel it. And so if we're to ride correctly, and I know that like the godfathers of everything and the godmothers of so many different aspects of the way we ride talk about this, but it kind of starts to land when you start to see the chronic issues that come up, which is we are obsessed with the front end of the horse, how it looks, where it is, if a horse is on the bit, not on the bit, are they in the frame, are they whipping their head around, are they going around like a camel? But in fact, if they're doing that, it's probably because there is an issue behind you, but you can't see it. You have to feel it.
Yeah.
And you have to also probably get really familiar with it on the ground, not just in the saddle.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a visual thing and a feel thing. And yeah, I totally agree with you. I know even like myself, I'm guilty as a rider of looking like, oh, how is my horse's neck coming out of the withers? How does it look? I don't want her just breaking at the pole. I want her collection needs to come from the hind end and then follow through. But I honestly think that for horse owners, one of the best things you can do is educate yourself on anatomy.
Which is hard because it's so hard. So it could be really boring
and it's very overwhelming. Yeah. I just gave some of my textbooks to a soon-to-be osteopathy student, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know where to start." And it is overwhelming, but I think it's really helpful because then you as a rider can say, "Okay, this feels off. Where could this be coming from?" And you can kind of help yourself, your body worker, and your veterinarian kind of narrow down where they should be looking if there's a problem.
What it says to me is, and I mean, guys, like I made a digital media platform because I'm not a textbook person. If you stack a bunch of books in front of me, I'm going to be like, I'm going to like wither inside myself.
Yeah.
So a lot of us are visual and a lot of us are experiential too. So I think the way that I've tried to tackle the beast that is equine anatomy and biomechanics is ask lots of questions when you're with different practitioners, really. And it's been so fun working with you and Connie and here at the clinic because I've learned so much just trying to be like a sponge. So ask lots of questions and also maybe bite off like one piece. So be like, okay, what is the thoracic sling and what is my horse's thoracic sling like? What's the integrity of my horse's pelvis? How is my horse mobile or immobile in the lumbar spine and why? And then you kind of start to dip into feet, and like feet are a whole thing. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And then you start to kind of dip into nutrition. But I feel like if you do it piece by piece, it becomes a little less, because at the end of the day, guys, like, come on, we're going to be doing this like our whole lives. And like you talk to, horsemen and women who have been in this for their whole lives and they're like, I'm still learning. We're all in a state of learning. And that's just like the permanence of it. Right. So then I feel like once that landed for me, it was like, okay, then we just let's just bite off little pieces and make it applicable. And I think that's why I use Lady and Gigi so much as examples, because once you have a real example, I find it a lot easier to learn.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think, like you said, little pieces at a time, it took me 4 years to learn this.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm still learning. I've been a certified osteopath for almost 5 years. I am not the same osteopath that I was when I walked out of my exam. It's taken me almost 10,000 horses to get the feel that I have. And so that's just me as a professional, but as a horse owner, same thing. I don't want people to like hear this podcast and be like, oh my God, I don't know anything and I should just be done. I shouldn't have a horse.
I think if they have that response too, it's very natural because
Totally.
I've had that response.
Yeah.
And then you must feel with knowing how much there is, it's like an iceberg.
It is. And I always say that like when you think that you know everything, that's dangerous because then you realize what you don't. Like I have epiphanies all the time where I'm like, oh my gosh, do I know what I'm doing? What is this? There's a missing piece here, you know? But that's awesome. I think that, and platforms like this for people, professionals as well, like we can all learn from stuff like this. And I think that as horse owners and professionals, you should never stop learning. You can learn something from everyone.
The vagus nerve.
Okay.
Let's dive into the vagus nerve because there's so much about it. And to me, it's like, it feels a little bit like a mecca. Let's just start from the beginning. What is the vagus nerve and why is it important?
So the vagus nerve it's one of the cranial nerves. So it sits, there's the nerve ending. It sits on the capsule of your COC1. So I'm just going to do anatomy first so I can kind of break it down. But your COC1 is your occiput and atlas. So that's, in layman's terms, that's the pole of the horse. Okay. That's where flexion.
So we're talking
extension,
about the pole.
Yeah.
Right
so
now.
the nerve ending sits in the joint capsule.
Okay.
So that nerve innervates every single organ in the body. Every single one. There's a left and a right one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Every single one. So it's really important because when you have when your vagus nerve is excitated or set off, that nerve sends signals from the organ that there is a problem here. And that can be like, it can be anything. It can be when there's trauma to the organ, when there's a pathology, when it's not regulating properly, anything. When it's immobile or displaced, it sends a signal to where the nerve ending ends and it causes a fixation of, we call it a segment, but it's basically those two vertebrae. So it's huge because, I mean, we have so many horses with immobilities in their pole, or like we'll have clients say, oh, my horse shakes its head every time I touch the reins, or something like that, or I'm not getting side bending, or I'm not getting lateral flexion on the left versus the right. Every time you have an organ problem in a horse, you are always going to have an occiput and atlas problem, an immobility there. It's important because it is a cranial nerve, because you have organs in your cranial system. So like you have your pituitary gland, like that's what it affects as well. And so this is interesting. I learned something, this was a couple years ago. Have you ever heard the term nerve lining a horse?
No.
Okay. So I learned this from a friend of mine, and she said there's a guy that he's a kind of a horse trainer, but like if you have a horse that is really, really nervous and you just can't get through to it, they do this nerve lining where it's a thin rope and they run it over the pole of the horse and it goes around their neck, and then they just tie it in a knot and they lunge the horse, and if the horse is responding like flighty or nervous and they're not responding to you, they pull on it and it will calm a horse down. The reason why that is, and she told me this, and I was thinking about my anatomy, and I was like, well, where does it go? And she showed me. I said, that's right where the vagus nerve ends. So every time you stimulate that horse there, it's actually bringing it back into a parasympathetic state.
Whoa.
So it's cool that like even training techniques, like there are horse trainers that kind of they talk about the vagus nerve and how they're getting to that source. Yeah. And it's real. Like there's kind of an anatomical scientific basis behind what they're doing.
For everyone who's listening to the podcast, so they're like, great, like Jessica, Noëlle, like vagus nerve, that sounds awesome. But how does that affect their lives or their horses' lives?
If there's a problem with your vagus nerve and it's like say if you're like I was talking about that sympathetic parasympathetic, if that sympathetic system is so overrided, like that vagus nerve it can't really regulate basically. So if you have a horse that is in stress all the time, like they can't regulate that parasympathetic system. And so that's why working on the occiput and atlas a lot of times, like, that's when horses really relax, and because you're trying to get them back into that parasympathetic state. And so I guess as for a horse owners, identifying that, there are certain symptoms like that you can look for. Like, again, I always say, like, I try not to say, like, there's no protocol to osteopathy. Like, I don't say, oh, your horse is not able to flex at the pole. It's probably got it probably does have a vagal nerve problem, but like, it's not a protocol based. So yeah, finding an osteopath to help you find the root problem is super important.
It kind of feels like a reset button.
100%. Yep.
So to me, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Like, it's like the vagal nerve is like a reset button. Maybe your horse's sympathetic nervous system is so activated that their like hormones are imbalanced. And then you've built a behavioral pattern, right? It kind of sounds like the vagal nerve and osteopathy can kind of allow you to sort of maybe reset.
Yeah.
Sort of like pressing the reset on your TV.
Yeah.
It's like, or turning your computer on and off.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just like, okay, we need to just start back from square one.
Yeah.
That feels kind of, that seems exciting and empowering because it gives you the ability to sort of maybe take a step back and go, okay, whoa. Where we go wrong?
Yeah.
And then it kind of seems like from when I've watched you work on my horses, the vagal nerve is like ground zero for, okay, let's sort of like, one, check into its integrity, and two, what is it telling me about the rest of the body?
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And so talking about the reset button, we do a technique on horses and humans. It's called a CV4, so it's called the compression of the fourth ventricle, and it's kind of one of the last things I do on a horse. And it's like your reboot. Like, okay, we fixed everything. Now I'm going to reset the system.
Cool.
And it's basically, it's working on the occiput and how the cerebral spinal fluid moves in and out of the cranium.
Okay.
But it does have you are kind of working with the vagal nerve as well. Yeah. And that's exactly what we call it. Like, my teacher always said, that's your reset button. That's what you do. You restart the computer after you fixed everything.
Our rapid fire questions, I'm going to ask you the same questions I asked Connie.
Sounds good.
And I've adjusted them a little bit for our horse health professionals. Okay.
Perfect.
If you could read one book to the horse world, what would it be?
I love the book. It's called From the Dry Bone to the Living Man by John Lewis. It is basically about Andrew Taylor Still, who is the father of osteopathy. And it is a little dry, but it, like, even me, I've been an osteopath again for 5 years, but every time I read that book, I'm like, holy moly, like, I have to go back to like where things originate, and it's not a horse book, it's about human osteopathy. But it's just cool about how it's evolved, and like how it's basically applying like your health of your body to like even almost a spiritual level, like how deep that goes. I don't know. I love that book. I guess that's probably why I'm recommending it. But love it.
Who do you think is the most iconic horse in history?
I have two.
Great.
And they are both barrel horses. But I'm biased. I'm going to say Stingray from that's Sherry Serby's good mare that she went to the NFR on, won the world on a few times. I think that horse is like, if you look at her, she looks incredible, number one, and the way she can do her job, she's kind of a freak, I think.
Yeah.
And then I think it's cool that, like, I don't know, I think, so I'm a mare person also. I love mares, and I think it's cool that when like a horse's heart and drive and love can be passed down, and Sherry's winning on several of her babies. There's lots of them, so I think that's really cool. And then I also, another barrel horse, his name's Louis he's Lisa Lockhart's good horse that she won the Canadian finals on a few times, and he's been to the NFR a lot of times, and he actually, it's cool because he has a song like there. I remember it was his last year at the NFR, and Lisa wasn't running him, but there's a song when they run down the alley at the Thomas and Mack, and when Haley Kinsel's sister has one too, but I remember Lisa wasn't running Louis, and then I don't know what round it was, but they played that song, and the crowd like erupted because they were like, oh my God, Louis coming out.
Aw.
And so I think he's cool, but also just because like I love Lisa as a horsewoman, but that horse has been through, like if you listen to some of her podcasts, like he has had all sorts of injuries and he comes back every single time like he's gonna win the world. So I think, I don't know, I have a soft spot for horses that like just have so much heart and try, and that's why, like, for me as an osteopath, like, it's hard because you see these horses, like, I'm an advocate for them, and like if they love their job, like I want to help them with that as well. And so yeah, I get kind of connected though when a horse, like, it doesn't matter how many war wounds they have, they just want to do.
They're warriors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I know that everyone listening, I'm going to go, like, I'm literally after this going to go and YouTube Stingray.
Yeah.
I want to watch this mare.
She's awesome.
And I also want to look up Louis.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really cool. Most undervalued skill as a horse owner?
Just noticing the small things. Like taking time to brush your horse every day and not just throw the saddle on. Like, it's amazing what you'll notice. Like, for example, sometimes I'm in a rush when I saddle my horses, but I've been trying to take a little bit more time. And the other day I noticed my horse's mane was, half of it was laying on one side of her neck, and it never does that.
Yeah.
Well, I went and worked on her, and yeah, her poor cervical spine was a disaster. I also don't get to work on my horses that often, the poor things. But stuff like that, like, taking the time to pay attention to detail to your horse, what's normal for them and what's not. So, like, yeah, when you brush your horse before they're saddled, feel what their muscles feel like. Is there something different? Look at their eyes. Is there pain in them today? Or is there discomfort? Yeah, I think sometimes, like, I don't know, I'm a really busy person. I, like, my day, it doesn't have enough hours in it.
Yeah.
So I find that sometimes when I get to my horses, like, I need to ride them, but I rush through things. But I think that's when people miss things and skip steps. So yeah, just taking the time to, pay attention to detail when you're saddling your horse, when you're feeding them. Like, all of the stuff of what you're feeding is important and what you're doing, but like observing them.
Well, and it makes me think, we can't make more hours in the day.
Yeah.
But, and I'm certainly challenging myself to do this, but you can choose how you arrive at the small amount of time that you do have to do something specific. And I've started to think, okay, if I take 30 seconds and just take a big deep breath and just kind of get in my body a little bit, and don't just do something mindlessly, don't be on your phone. I've really tried to make a promise to myself to not be on my phone when I'm with my horses, so that they can have my full and undivided attention. And I think the reason so when you talk about that, it's like, I don't think, I think it's unrealistic for all of us to try to make more time. Like, we can't spend all day riding our horses, or being with the horses, wouldn't that be nice?
Yes. Oh.
But I think we can optimize when we are with them. And like you said, like, observing the little things, you can observe a lot in like 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, you can take a little bit of less time to ride to maybe take a little bit more time to just connect with your horse's body and see what's going on. Who is the greatest horse practitioner or horse health mind in history?
Okay, I'm going to be biased. I would have to say my teacher, Yannick Lugan. We always joke that, like, when you're in school with him, like, he's so smart that sometimes you're just like, okay, Yannick, can you bring it, like, come down to earth, talk in human form? But so as we're going through osteopathy school, we're lucky enough, once we get to module 4, we can do clinic days. And to watch him work is like, it's incredible. Like, even now, if I've seen, like, it kind of makes me come home and think, oh my gosh, like, should I be doing this?
Yeah.
But what he can see, what he can feel, how he can communicate with the clients, and how he can communicate with a horse is incredible. Cool. He can look at a horse and be like, that's what that horse has. And then he's right. It's just, he is an advocate for osteopathy. Like, that is his number one. And he is working so hard to try and keep us alive as a profession. Yeah. Because unfortunately, there is a bit of a threat to what we do, just because it's kind of weird that someone like us can fix a root problem or You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's his main mission, is to keep that true, keep that alive. One of my favorite quotes by Andrew Taylor still is, "Find it, fix it, leave it alone, and let nature do the rest." And that's kind of what he's like, follow that, be true to it, and don't get so delved up in like, you know, what your clients want, and like be an advocate for your horse. That's your number one. So I would say him.
Amazing.
Yeah, he is. I am who I am today because of learning from him. So yeah.
Oh, that's so cool, dude.
Yeah.
And then last question, which I kind of know the answer to already, is mares, geldings, or stallions?
Oh, I'm a mare girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have some awesome geldings and I love them, but when you find a mare that like will go to the end of the earth for you, there's nothing like it.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. My brain is like officially blown.
Thank you for having me. I love talking about this stuff, so I really appreciate this.